or anything. So if you don't completely understand the background, that's okay. So it starts with David Wood. David Wood is the chair of London Futurists. He's important in my life for a lot of reasons. For instance, the future and all that jazz. I talk about how we've had successful ventures all around the world, but the best one was at the Vortex Jazz Club in London. And the reason there were so many people there is that David Wood promoted that. So half the people were Mallory Chipman fans and half the people were sort of David Wood fans. And we filled the place. It holds 80 people and we had 80 people there. Yeah. And for my birthday, David Wood gave the opening presentation and Arjun Karki was also there at the time. And it sort of brings my whole life together, you know, the future and all that jazz and humanitarian ventures in Nepal. And yeah, so the big news in the last hour is that David Pearce has agreed to teach in the special version of the course we're doing for Nepal that we will trial this summer. He only has to do it like once, so it's not like over and over again. But the importance of that is he's the first senior faculty to say that he would take part. And now, if you think about it, how can anyone else refuse if David Pearce has already accepted? They have no excuse. They have to do it. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So that you get the idea that David Wood and I are friends. David Wood has published a book called Vital Foresight. And they were searching for reviewers of the book, and I volunteered, and they seemed quite enthusiastic about that idea. But then how do you write a review of a book, somebody who's a good friend of yours? Well, I noticed the book has no pictures whatsoever, 0 pictures, no illustrations of any kind. It's pure text. And of course, I'm big on graphics. So what we're doing is doing a review with me as the single author, but with a lot of Ashita Mogi's graphics and a small number of Qingyan Wang's graphics. She's a pathology resident at the University of Montreal. So there was so much of Ashita Mogi's graphics in the thing that I asked her if she would like to be a co-author. And she said, no, but can I comment on it? I said, yes, you can comment. So her first comment was to ask if there's any limit on the number of pictures you can have in a book review. And I said, the publisher says there is no limit. On the other hand, most book reviews have no pictures whatsoever. So we'll probably win the world's record for the number of illustrations in a book review. No one will ever have more of them than us. And Ashita's second question was a bit more intellectually complicated. You know about the meeting, or you should know, between Mark Twain and Rudyard Kipling. This was an important historic meeting. And Mark Twain said that Rudyard Kipling knows all there is to know, and I know the rest. So I thought it would be cute if I said the same thing about me and David Wood. So David Wood knows all there is to know, and I know the rest. And Ashita's question was, what was the evidence that I know the rest? So I realized that at that point, there was no evidence that I knew the rest. So then I got the idea of critiquing this 4 hours of content from December 2021 from Stuart Russell, because I had some pretty strong opinions about that. And David Wood was the main promoter of that link. Nobody seemed to know about this content till David Wood promoted it. So it's not like he approved of it or created it, but he kind of promoted it. So it seemed fair to say, this is a part of him knowing all there is to know. And I know the rest is whatever critique I can bring to Stuart Russell's lectures. Then I got the idea that I'd be a lot better off if I was actually debating this with somebody knowledgeable and who would enjoy this content. And that's how today came about, because a lot of the things that we're talking about, I think David Pearce has quite strong opinions on and has been thinking about it for many years. There's no one who can wax more poetic about the hard problem of consciousness than David Pearce. That's one of his favorite topics. Yeah, and I'm sure that will come up today. Okay, so David, is there any sort of preamble you wish to or anything you want to say before we start?
No, after that build up, I feel I ought to somehow be colorful and flamboyant, but normally if I walk into a room, I hope no one notices. I'm not one of these charismatic, larger than life folk. Yes, I've thought about some of these problems, but if you're expecting song and dance or verbal pyrotechnics, apologies.
See, what the students need to know that I think will immediately warm you up to David Pearce is I once suggested that he has had a professional haircut. And I think in his whole life, he's never had a professional haircut. And that's pretty cool, don't you think? There have to be some people like that, and he's one of them. So you know, and think of your own personal budget, how much you're spending on professional haircuts. David Pearce is spending his money much more wisely than you, right? Because the amount of his budget spent on personal professional haircuts is approximately zero, I think. So is that still true, David?
No, I have actually used a barber before, but I don't go anywhere near a barber these days. I mean, some people would suggest I ought to invest in a comb and similar transhumanist technologies, but yes, I don't spend a lot of time in front of the mirror.
Right, right. Yeah, but okay, so I'm now going to go to that I think that's the longest email preparing for a teaching session I've ever sent to the course. So I'm going to go to that email now, and we're going to start talking about these things. Now, you would understand that the background here, you remember the first day of the course, I told you there is content from Rich Sutton, which will be on the exam, which is basically that when machines are smarter than we are, when there's sentient AI, we should treat those sentient machines as equals, include them in our circle of empathy, and give up the idea that humans need to be in charge of the world forever. And yeah, so you're required to know that for the exam, and to get the idea now that Stuart Russell believes exactly the opposite. Without the need for any justification whatsoever, he believes that humans should always be in charge of the earth. And that means that if machines eventually are smarter than we are, that we still have to be in control of them. And that's basically what the 4 hours of lecture was sort of about, simply, is kind of how to do that, how to maintain control when faced with an entity that's smarter than you are and getting much, much smarter all the time. Okay, so we start then in part 2, the second hour of the Stuart Russell lectures. And So an audience member, Virginia Watson, asks, I was wondering about the balance of AI and humans, the power balance. What should it be? Because AI is not perfect, but neither are humans. How does that balance fall? And Stuart gives a very honest reply that ends with the word period. And think of how often you end something with the word period and what it means when you end something with the word period. He says, I think I am a human chauvinist in the sense that I think human beings ought to have control forever. And that is the subject of the first and fourth lectures in this series. Why that human control might not be the case and how we can ensure that it will be the case. And when I started working on this, I found out there are people who'd be completely happy for the human race to disappear. Some because they think the human race has destroyed and pillaged the planet, and they think that nature should be protected against humans, and we should just get rid of humans. They're called anti-natalists. But then there are other people who think that if machines are more intelligent than us, it's better that they control the earth in the future, not the human race. And that's similar to what I say in the promo, the first promo that we did for the future and all that jazz, where I talk about waking up in the morning, you look out the window and you realize all the Earth's problems are fixed and you have no idea how. That the sky is bluer, the toxins in the air are zero, the oxygen level is higher than it's ever been, the CO2 level is lower, the grass and everything else is greener than you've ever seen it, the levels of the oceans are receding to their proper depth, and everything is just perfect, except you have no idea how it happened because humans don't seem to have been able to do this. Yeah. Then he goes on to say, but actually, I don't think of this as a sort of IQ competition, i.e., whoever wins the IQ competition gets to rule the earth, because that is not what makes human existence valuable, period. And then after that, there's no discussion. Just ends the session right there. I think because he knows he's kind of on shaky ground. So, David, what do you think of these ideas? And where do you stand on these issues?
Good heavens. Okay, well, in terms of balance, I think one has to recall that everything AI can do, you and I can do, and more once we have neurochips. Now, with a little narrow superintelligence on a neurochip, you can outperform any human chess player, any Go player, essentially do all the things that artificial intelligence can do, and a great deal more, because humans and other organic robots are functionally capable of performing feats that are impossible for a classical digital computer or connectionist system, because we can solve the binding problem and they can't. They are zombies. Now, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the binding problem, but essentially you and I are capable of both local and global binding. By local binding, I mean that you and I don't have what's known as integrative agnosia. Someone, it's very rare disorder, integrative agnosia, can see a handle and can see a brush, but can't see a paintbrush. You and I are capable of what seems to be perceiving perceptual objects. What's more, we can do so as part of the unity of perception and the unity of the self. and we have a pleasure-pain axis, and we experience things that matter. Whereas classical digital computers, classical Turing machines, they can't solve the binding problem. And said one way to appreciate just how functionally, computationally powerful binding is to imagine if you had, this is just an example, integrative agnosia, you had simultanagnosia. Someone with simultanagnosia can only see one object at once. You have akinetopsia or motion blindness. Someone with a neurological disorder of motion blindness can't see motion. And you had severe schizophrenia. You had no kind of integrated self. In this kind of condition on the African savanna, you would rapidly starve or get eaten. Phenomenal binding is computationally, functionally extraordinarily powerful. I would argue that the phenomenon of binding itself is non-algorithmic, by which I mean that think of Turing's original example of a classical Turing machine, but instead of ones and zeros, replace the ones and zeros with discrete pixels of experience, and then execute the program. Regardless of how complicated the code or how fast the program is run, all you're going to get is a micro-experiential zombie. And as I said, there are all kinds of things that humans can do that zombies can't. We can talk about the nature and existence of consciousness. We can talk about the binding problem. We can explore different state spaces of consciousness. And a classical Turing machine, a digital zombie, has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about now. Yeah, I would say that sentience is the key to the plot, and a combination of genetically rewritten and AI enhanced humans, and then transhumans and posthumans are going to inherit the cosmos. That there isn't going to be some kind of zombie coup.
Good.
Now, well, let's go. That's the first part of what I was going to say. Right. The second part, though, of your question, crudely speaking, is humanity a good thing or a bad thing? I said I'm a rather atypical transhumanist here. Just background. What is a transhumanist? Transhumanists believe essentially in creating a triple S civilization of super intelligence, super longevity, and super happiness. Most transhumanists are pretty positive and optimistic. I have I'll be honest, an extraordinarily dark view of Darwinian life. I think we're sentient malware. I mean, to make my point, intellectual honesty would really mean today that I came to you with just a brief catalogue of some of the horrors, the things that humans do. I'm not going to do it. As I said, it would be incredibly grim. I mean, human history, war and genocide kills over 600 million people. Every 5 days we kill as many non-human animals. Essentially, we are a monstrous species. Darwinian life is a terrible engine for the creation of suffering. And though I might have a smile and I'm saying this in a slightly jaunty voice, yeah, I regard Darwinian life as fundamentally evil. But what should be done about it? And here there are a number of options. Antinatalism. Antinatalism is not a solution to the problem of suffering. Otherwise, Gautama Buddha, smart fellow, 2,500 years ago, would have simply urged people to stop breeding. But the very nature of selection pressure means that any genetic predisposition not to have children is going to be weeded out of the gene pool. It's essentially involuntary childlessness causes a great deal of suffering. A lot of people just have this compulsion to reproduce. So antinatalism, though it may be ethically desirable on an individual basis, if you don't want to bring more suffering into the world, is not a solution to the problem of suffering. One possible solution to the problem of suffering is artificial intelligence, AGI. And although there are some conceptions of superintelligence, such as mine, which essentially is going to involve AI augmented humans, transhumans, and then posthumans, or Ray Kurzweil's vision of essentially fusion between humans and our machines. Other versions of post-human superintelligence conceive of some kind of runaway intelligence explosion. This is the scenario which was first explored by mathematician I.J. Good, developed further by Eliezer Yudkowsky and his colleagues at MIRI, and probably became most widely known thanks to Nick Bostrom and his book Superintelligence. Under the so-called intelligence explosion scenario, recursively self-improving software-based AI goes boom, that is essentially uncontrollable. And it is highly likely that essentially machine intelligence that is inimical to human interests is going to eclipse humans and may turn us into the equivalent of paperclips. This is an example. As I said, for reasons I touched on earlier, I don't regard the intelligence scenario, explosion scenario, as credible. I said digital zombies are not going to stage a coup and take over and turn us into paperclips. If I did believe in this kind of scenario, well, yes, as I said, I suppose as a believer in suffering-focused ethics, negative utilitarianism, I would encourage deep entryism into existential risk institutes, and then, see how it'd be possible to accelerate the intelligence explosion and so eradicate Darwinian malware. But this is not what I urge. Instead, I think we should use artificial intelligence and biotechnology to fix the problem of suffering, which is going to be technically feasible, and that has been the particular focus of my own work. Essentially, the entire biosphere is programmable. I think all prospective parents should be encouraged to use pre-implantation genetic screening, counseling soon, germline editing, and essentially this is going to be the way to fix the problem of suffering. A lot more could be said there. I'm happy to do so, but this isn't the particular focus. Well, it's not the primary focus of today's talk. But just to wrap up this little section, I see the underlying challenge as not building friendly AI, but building sentience-friendly biological intelligence, because it is highly likely this century that thermonuclear weapons are going to be used in war. After all, it's what evolution designed coalitions of male primates to do, to wage war against other coalitions of male primates. We're already teetering on the brink now of war in the Ukraine. Here we have, essentially nuclear armed powers. The assumption seems to be the assumption that, this isn't going to spiral out into all out nuclear war, but we simply don't know. yes, although I am cautiously optimistic in the medium to long run that the problem of suffering can be fixed, I am not entirely optimistic this century. And the reason is not because I fear what evil AI is going to do, it's because I fear human male primates.
Yes, right. So, you know, there's a lot of wonderful video content of David Pearce from the past. And so some of the things we're not talking about very much today, you can really find him talking about for a long period of time. For instance, how much better it would be if women were in charge of everything. We've talked about that at some length in the past, and there's considerable evidence for that. It's probably not practical, but it's quite an interesting subject. And the other is the complete abolition of suffering, not only amongst humans, but also animals. And you may say, well, how is that possible? But we've delved quite deeply into, you know, how you could teach lions and other beasts to, you know, to successfully inhabit the world without killing other things all the time. Yeah, so those are things we're not talking about today, but they're quite interesting subjects if you wish to look into past videos. Okay, so one of the things that Stuart Russell seems quite offended at is the idea of giving any machine an IQ score. He constantly says it's not a competition between IQs, and IQs don't mean anything for, you know, machines. But don't you think if there was a really competent general artificial intelligence that could do all the things that humans can, that they could, one of the things they could do is take an IQ test, right? There would be an actual IQ score from a standard human IQ test, which is no reason that such a machine couldn't take. So I think Russell is formally wrong there that you could never measure IQ in machines. That's what I think. What do you think, David?
I think it will be possible to program or train up machines that surpass humans in IQ tests, but IQ tests don't measure general intelligence. Essentially, IQ measures the Asperger's conception of intelligence. And essentially, IQ tests, they're mind blind. They don't depend on ability to explore consciousness or introspection. They don't involve cooperative problem solving. Intelligence is a function of your entire phenomenal world simulation, the egocentric world simulation that your mind brain is running just now. Whereas IQ tests are designed to test prowess at a particular form of logico-linguistic thought. Now, although I might appear to be disparaging here of autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's, I promise I'm not. People with Asperger's, from Newton to Jeremy Bentham to quite possibly Einstein, clearly their achievements have been seminal, and not least people high on the spectrum are hoping to power the AI revolution. But this is simply one particular facet of intelligence, and full spectrum superintelligence will be immeasurably richer.
Yeah, okay. So let me go on here. So back to Stuart Russell. So finally, in the fourth video, part 4, he tells exactly how this is going to work, where these machines that are, quote, smarter than we are kept in line, kept control over by humans. And this is how it is described. And I really don't think this would work or is practical. But anyway, I see what you think. He says, we have to build systems that know they do not know the final objective. Number 1, machines' only objective is to maximize the realization of human preferences. Number 2, the machine is initially uncertain completely what those preferences are. Number 3.3, the ultimate source of information about human preferences is human behavior. Here, behavior includes everything we do and everything we say. It also includes things we don't do, like not reading your email during lectures. It also includes the entire written record, because most of what we write about is humans doing things that other humans being upset about it. So this principle grounds the meaning contained in the first 2 principles. That is, the machine doesn't know what humans want and is uncertain about what human preferences might be, but its main objective is to maximize the realization of these human preferences. So the machine learns 8 billion different predictive models to account for everyone on Earth, period. That's the plan. So I have said that I don't think this is practical. And I mean, it would be ongoing, right? As soon as you've done it for 8 billion, you've got the next 8 billion and one and so on. And isn't it probably true that if you average all of that, the preferences of everybody on the planet averaged, and then follow that as your goal, would not satisfy anyone. That's my postulate, that if you have a plan that is based on the average opinions of everybody in the world, that would not satisfy anybody in the world. David, what do you think about that?
Yes, for a start, it is extraordinarily anthropocentric, focusing on the preferences of just members of one particular race or species. Right. That if one is some kind of preference utilitarian, that one should be accommodating everyone's preferences. But essentially, so many human preferences, of course not just human, but non-human animal preferences, are in conflict, and it is logically impossible for post-human superintelligence to satisfy most of these preferences. I mean, one can use trivial example, football. Everyone wants their team to win the cup. But 99 out of 100 supporters are going to be disappointed. I was about to say this is a trivial example, but of course for fanatical football supporters, it isn't trivial. But writ large, also essentially people have human and non-human animals, a very limited insight into their own interests. We are justifiably suspicious of paternalism. We're suspicious because we reckon that so-called paternalists won't necessarily really have our interests at heart. But yes, this notional machine superintelligence that is somehow supposed to be reconciling the irreconcilable, it's logically impossible. One could aim to give, here's a couple of examples. If one believes in this scenario of an intelligence explosion, that there's going to be machine super intelligence, all powerful or effectively all powerful, number of possibilities. One could give this seed AI proto super intelligence the utility function of, if it's negative utilitarianism, this is the example often given, that the seed AI or AGI might decide to end suffering by simply wiping out all sentient life, which, if you're a negative utilitarian, wouldn't be a bad thing, but I don't regard this as technically or sociologically credible. Perhaps more intuitively, far more people subscribe to classical utilitarianism. We should be essentially striving to minimize suffering and maximize happiness. But the upshot of a notional, and I stress notional, AGI that was trying to minimize suffering and maximize happiness would be equally apocalyptic, because clearly humans are an extremely suboptimal way to maximize bliss. And therefore, in theory, at any rate, on this scenario, one could imagine some kind of utilitarian shockwave, where utilitarian is matter and energy optimized for pure bliss. The shockwave alludes to its presumed velocity of propagation. And so one imagines, essentially this radiating explosion of pure, undifferentiated, all-consuming bliss, this kind of cosmic orgasm spreading out from ground zero, so to speak. I said this is not a scenario I regard as credible, but if you believe in some kind of intelligence explosion scenario, this is something to be taken seriously. I'm going to have to minimize something. Sorry, that's popped up. WinZip is kindly telling me that my trial subscription has expired. Where were we? Yes, utilitarian shockwave. Now, the example most commonly given of out of control AI is paperclips. A scenario in which a badly programmed AI converts the universe into the functional equivalent of paperclips. If this scenario is credible, the intelligence explosion, I think it would be more likely what's going to be optimized is pure bliss.
Yeah. So finally, let's talk about consciousness. And so, Stuart Russell, if you think that his ideas won't work, there's an obvious out, because he's assuming that consciousness will not emerge, but he has this safety valve that if consciousness does emerge, then all bets are off. Everything's changed. And he doesn't tell what scenario B is. If all your super sentient machines become conscious, what does Stuart Russell then think will happen? Or how do you keep control of them? He doesn't seem to have a plan for that. He thinks it's so unlikely that consciousness will emerge. So what do you think? In some logical definition of consciousness, do you think as machines get smarter and smarter that it will naturally emerge at some time? Or do you think we could go the whole century and it wouldn't emerge at all? What do you think, David?
Yeah, essentially, I was touching on earlier, classical Turing machines, classically parallel connectionless systems are zombies. Technically, I suspect they may be micro-experiential zombies, but for all practical purposes, they are zombies. And the only way that subjects of experience, sentient systems, can emerge is going to be via so-called strong emergence. And strong emergence is akin to magic. I don't know how familiar everyone is with essentially, I mean, for example, take something like biological life. We now know that life can, in principle, be reduced via quantum chemistry to fundamental physics. So this is an example of weak emergence. But strong emergence is some kind of inexplicable eruption into nature of something that doesn't supervene on the underlying physics. Just for example, imagine if the software on your desktop PC its behavior didn't supervene on the behavior of the underlying machine code. So essentially, people who believe that consciousness is somehow going to emerge in artificial intelligence, classical Turing machines, none of them have any kind of explanation or account of how this is possible. As far as I can tell, it's going to be magic and all but name. I think it's quite commonly researchers will assume that it's something to do with advanced intelligence because we have this dimmer switch model, but it's quite striking that the most intense forms of consciousness also tend to be the most primitive, whether it's orgasmic bliss or uncontrollable panic or agony, extremely intense, very, very primitive. Yet the ability to solve differential equations or generate complex, syntactically correct sentences like the one I'm doing now, this is opaque to introspection, or at least it is extraordinarily difficult to introspect. The phenomenology of cognition is extremely subtle and elusive. And if we make standard physicalist assumptions, then yeah, essentially programmable digital zombies are not going to wake up. Now, you might be asking, how come humans and other biological organisms, animals, how are we capable of consciousness and phenomenal binding? Very happy to explore this, but this opens a whole can of worms, if you'll pardon the unvegan metaphor.
Yeah, well, don't you think I should go to gallery view, and some of the students I think will be motivated to ask questions. That's my prediction, because these are pretty powerful things that we're discussing. So it only take one, but does somebody want to start off with some questions? Could it be for David or me or both of us or the assembled multitude, whatever you wish. So Hannah, are you about to unmute or?
I'm just kind of processing the information and everything, because there's a lot, and I think that it's like kind of beyond my head and beyond my understanding, and I'm just trying to like kind of take that all in and trying to make sense of it for myself. But yeah, no, it was very, very interesting, kind of like taking all this into perspective and looking at it in a different way that I kind of never really thought about it. But yeah, no, it was really fascinating.
Yeah, okay, well, maybe I'll call on Nadia. She's the only TA here at the moment. Nadia, you moved to ask any penetrating questions of either one of us here? Yeah.
I mean, as Hannah said, it's like a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is, yeah.
Because some of it seems so far flung, and I find myself wondering, like we're discussing all these prospects of the future and technology advancing beyond our imaginings. And it feels probably a bit closer to us in like what you might call like the global north and like developed countries living in a city. But I'm just like thinking like living on like a farm or for my grandma, like this reality is like so far away and so beyond just like, you know, regular daily life. So I was just thinking about that, how it seems like sometimes we're thinking light years ahead, and
Yeah.
it's
So it
like people are
applies.
being left behind. I don't know.
Yeah, it applies to the Nepal course exactly. And think of how that course protects us. Like somebody could look at this course as it is and say, these people are living in a dream world. You know, there's nothing grounding them to the reality of humans living on the planet. But people living in Nepal are dealing with practical things every day, you know, and like COVID is rampant there. There are many things that we never give a second thought to that are huge problems there. And so what we're being tasked with really is to free them, to be as free, to have the same kind of personhood that we have here, and to ask the same questions about the universe and life that we ask here. Whereas what they're used to is other people telling them what to do, and the idea they have no agency to change anything, and yeah, that they must do what the ruler says, what the parents say, and you know, very little time spent. Yeah, Pusha, do you have any thoughts about this? Does this seem completely beyond what people in your home country would find valuable, or is it what they would find most valuable? What do you think?
Like you said, like the situation is in Nepal is totally different from like what it is over here. So, but it's good that they will get this opportunity to like learn new things, and also with new people and with all social media and globalization, there are new students who are coming up with better ideas and better knowledge. So maybe it will be very beneficial for them. Yes, and it's a very good opportunity for them. It will be a good opportunity for them if they
Yeah.
get to learn things like this. Yeah.
You can imagine that the different vantage points will bring insights that couldn't have come any other way, and that certain of the problems that we all will be wrestling with in the first world with these issues, I think maybe they're insoluble for us, but somebody coming from an entirely different vantage point, who just can't imagine how we could think of things the way we're thinking of things, could maybe come up with solutions to some of these. Yeah, I think I'm pointing out to you that doing the course for Nepal next summer, one of the things I am so convinced of is it will benefit the overall course very much. The subjects that Arjun Karki and other Nepalese people say they want in the course are very likely to be subjects that the rest of you would also want. Maybe you haven't thought of them, but they'll be things that you'll want. And what I also think is likely to be true for a number of reasons. Think about David Pearce and me talking to you now. When we do the same thing for a Nepalese audience, it will probably be better. It'll be better for two reasons. First of all, this is sort of an abnormal part of the day for David. This isn't the time that he functions best. But secondly, it will be more surprising for the Nepalese audience, right? I mean, you guys have sort of been exposed to these ideas before to some extent, but it's going to be the kind of novelty of it is going to be much greater for them. And when they hear me say that they're of an age that they can still learn futurism, whereas people in Nepal in their 30s and 40s, there's no sense trying to teach them futurism. That must be a gross oversimplification, right? But I'm just trying to explain why it is that I've been going there for 24 years, but I'm not really taught futurism there ever, because I just felt that it was beyond what the audience would really accept. But I think it makes it much more legitimate as a course. I think the medical students can respect more what we're doing in the course. Once we do it for Nepal and make a success of that, then we really have something, you know. Otherwise, we're just privileged white people, you know, doing this stupid conversation about nothing practical, right? But once we get people from resource limited settings, their lives by necessity are largely practical. You know, there are things every day. Even crossing the street, Pooja's gonna think that I'm a coward, but boy, crossing a street in, you know, Nepal, you really take your life in your hands every single time, right? There are no rules, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yes. And when I first went to India, it was so amazing. I took the route to the Taj Mahal with a tour guide, and there were burning wrecks on either side of the road the whole way, from head-on collisions and so on. And it's not just people going too fast. You have the odd ox carts and that sort of thing. Then I came back, and the funniest thing was, I talked to Bryce Weir, who was the chair of surgery at the time, and he had done something very similar, taking that same road, seeing all the burning recent car crashes on either side of you and so on, and thinking of that many head-on collisions. And he just said that India was a crazy country and he's never going back. I said, no, that's not the right answer. You know, I mean, I can't tell you what the right answer is, but I know that that's not it. So Kashika, any thoughts about that? How should we think about the dangers of the road in India? What should our concept be? Any thoughts about that?
Can you say that one more time? I can hear you. Oh, can you say that one more time? Can you hear me?
No, what I was saying is that it's very dangerous to cross the road because there aren't rules, and so I'm wondering, what is that one of the basic differences between life there and life here? I don't know. It seems that way to me.
Okay, so in India, so
Yeah.
it's not a very highly developed road. So we have cross paths where people should walk, and there are rules, but it isn't specifically in every single place. So if you're in just a street, you don't have any rules that we need to walk by or something like that. But when you go on a highway or a flyover or some a very high traffic prone area, so that's when rules starts to come in. So if you're just in a normal street, normal road, you have no rules to follow, but you still have to be very self-conscious about how you're walking on the road, or else you might get into an accident. So
Yeah.
especially life here and life there, and according to the roads, and I think it's pretty much similar. And but the thing is that I think it's much more. So in India, roads are kind of still working on. So For me, I live in a very city, well-developed place. So people who live in rural areas, so I don't think they still have a very well-developed roads,
Right.
and you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think I was probably over simplifying. So, David, you can also think about intelligence and age. Kasika has been taking part in this course for a lot of 2021 and also 2022. She's 14 and she gets up in India in the middle of the night to take part in this course. So she's even tireder than you are, and her brain is still growing, right? Very actively, and new synapses being made and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I wonder, do any of the medical students have any thoughts or things they want to ask or comments? I'm pleased to see medical students here. I don't know if any of you want to unmute. Maybe not. Yeah.
While people, if anyone has any questions or thoughts, just one remark I wanted to make. If one isn't careful, it's easy to slip in this idea that, you know, kind of advanced, rich Western countries are teaching poor Indians things. But I think
Yes.
this isn't straightforward populist rhetoric. That actually, whether it's Buddhism or high-tech or Jainism, that the traditions of the Indian subcontinent have a lot to offer. For example, Jainism. Jains are most commonly known for their habit of, as we know, sweeping the ground in front of them rather than inadvertently treading on an insect. What is the relevance here to transhumanism and artificial intelligence? Well, if it is the case, as many futurists believe, that we are on the brink of an era of superhuman intelligence, then compared to superhuman intelligence, humans may be akin to bugs. And yeah, this lesson that humble minds matter. Indeed, there was a while where I used to describe my position as high-tech Jainism. I stopped doing so because not enough people caught the allusion. But the reason I use the expression high-tech Jainism is that if you say you're a negative utilitarian, people suspect you're plotting Armageddon to destroy life, ending suffering that way. But precisely because I'm a negative utilitarian, I think we should uphold in law the sanctity of life, including non-human life, because humans simply can't be trusted. And yeah, humble minds matter, and we ought to be engineering the well-being of all sentients. And at their best, I think the traditions of the Indian subcontinent, not least this notion of ahimsa, I'm probably mispronouncing it, or harmlessness. You're less likely to be regarded as crazy on the Indian subcontinent if you express an aspiration to the well-being of all sentients than if you do so in Europe or the United States.
Yeah. Well,
I have a question, actually. Something you said just like clicked in my head, and I like last year I did do a lot of reading about like current feminist methodologies that sort of look into what we define in our relationships with other beings, right? So, you know, there's non-human others who are animals, and then there's also a question, it's also informed by indigenous scholarship about relations with non-human, I guess what we'd consider material entities, right? So it's
right,
you know,
mountains
expanding
and streams
on that
and wilderness. Yeah,
expanding on like just considering animals in our circle of life, and expanding that to, you know, non-living things that we would consider non-living, like rocks or even technology, right? That's something I find fascinating to think about. Will we treat AI and super intelligence as, you know, a non-human other that we're in relation to, or is it, you know, the separation? And I see, David, you're pulling some faces there.
So I wasn't
I'd love
ready
to know,
to.
I'd
I
love
wasn't.
to know what you think, because yeah, I'm not like well versed in these like theories, but I just find it fascinating, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you. So I wasn't aware of the fact I was putting a face. Yeah, I am a sentientist in that, yes, I have no compunction about discriminating against non-sentient entities, including fabulously complicated computer software, or for that matter, rocks, streams, trees, or anything like it. In that I think phenomenally bound subjects of experience with a pleasure-pain axis, and this extends from everything from a worm or an ant to a pig to a human, subjects of experience matter, whereas non-sentient information processing systems have no intrinsic worth or value. They've no interest as such. That any value or disvalue they have is purely instrumental. And so, yes, we should expand our circle of compassion, but yeah, there is no need to go beyond subjects of experience. So yes, a worm or an ant, but not a digital computer or a rock.
What about plants, though? Plants are not conscious. They don't need consciousness. But the really big ones, like big old trees, hundreds of years old, you probably have some, you know, warm feeling toward such large woody structures, or do you not, David? Do you not feel anything for them?
Well, I wouldn't vandalize a tree, and I would take a dim view of anyone who did. But nonetheless, as you suggested, trees are not subjects of experience. They don't have energetically expensive nervous systems. Even if consciousness is fundamental to the world, even if individual cells may possess rudimentary consciousness, plant cells are encased in thick cellulose cell walls. So there is no phenomenal unity there, and that the value of trees, derives from their value or disvalue to sentient beings.
Yeah. Okay.
So I suppose the hope is that if superintelligence will see us as something akin to worms, that they hold worms in their circle of compassion.
Well, yes, as I said, once again, this does assume that superintelligence is something alien to us rather than superintelligence being our genetically written AI augmented successors. But yeah, run with the idea that machine superintelligence really is full spectrum superintelligence. Presumably, the idea is that they should care for worm-like minds like us. On the other hand, if, as I said, I don't believe in this scenario, that if, yes, there is a compassionate, godlike AI, it might well be that this compassionate, godlike AI would decide to take us out of our misery, recognizing that we are pain-ridden Darwinian malware. After all, a benevolent, godlike superintelligence wouldn't create Darwinian life. Okay, this is controversial, but if you, just look at the unspeakable suffering in the world, no benevolent superintelligence or deity would create such obscene suffering. So the question to ask then, if you believe in the intelligence explosion scenario, is whether machine superintelligence will exhibit status quo bias. And I don't think there would be any particular reason to expect it to exhibit status quo bias.
Yeah. So let me, let's talk about some graphics. So the ineffable, the things that can't be put in words, it's been claimed that GPT-3 and other like 2022 and 2021 computers are able to grasp ineffable content, concepts that cannot be expressed in words or formulas. And so pathology resident at University of Montreal, Qingyun Wang, has done this graphic of the ineffable for the review of David Wood's book. And yeah, she and I have also talked about the fact that the background on this graphic is probably also a representation of ineffable content. You know, things about Kim Solez and his robotic dog that can't be put in words. Yeah, that was done in 2021. This is the graphic that she's done for the Nepal version of the course. Now, we don't have a logo for the regular version of the course, but now we have a logo for the Nepal version of the course. And the nice thing is Pooja likes it. So Pooja's from Nepal and she has approved of it. So that's good. It suggests something is going right. Then what about this concept, David? This is a depiction of the basic goodness of human beings. Now, I would have thought that's a widespread notion. I don't know if there is such a thing as the basic goodness, but I would imagine there's such a concept. But if you search on that, you don't find a single graphic. So as far as I know, this picture that Ashita has put together is like the first depiction of the basic goodness of human beings. So what does David Pearce think? Is there such a thing? Do you believe in the basic goodness of human beings? Or is this completely fabricated?
Well, I think anyone who's been influenced by the selfish gene and acquired this kind of gene's eye view of the world will be extremely skeptical of innate human goodness. The nearest I come to anything like the goodness of humans is what I rather grandly call the principle of weak benevolence, in that although humans can be extremely unfeeling and callous a lot of the time, we are not actively, most of us, there are exceptions, most of us are not actively malevolent. And you know, if I talk, imagine a mouse in India. Would you like this mouse to be sad, happy, or just neutral? And assuming most people were to accept this question as not too preposterous, they would probably say, yeah, happy mouse, why not? No skin off my nose. Extraordinarily weak, but nonetheless, I would say this is our best hope for the future. An illustration of how weak is this principle of weak benevolence is that you can tell people, or people can even accept in the abstract, that a pig, for example, is as sentient and demonstrably as sapient as a pre-linguistic toddler, and they will still eat meat and justify eating meat. And yeah, that essentially it's more important to have a hamburger over a veggie burger than the life and suffering of another sentient being. So yeah, extremely weak our predisposition to benevolence, and yet at the same time, one of the effects of technology massively amplifies our capacity to do good or to do harm. And I suppose one reason I might be cautiously optimistic for the future is that, well, whereas today it would be extraordinarily difficult to get rid of suffering in the world in the next 100 years, eventually it's going to become technically trivial, as simple as pressing a few knobs. And so long as it doesn't involve personal inconvenience, I suspect people will go along with it. I mean, something like the horrors of animal agriculture today are going to be phased out as much as anything because of cultured meat, cruelty-free meat and animal products, that people know, at least more and more people know now, the moral arguments against factory farming, animal agriculture, slaughterhouses. But what is actually going to be decisive in shutting this cruel apparatus, this monstrous apparatus, is going to be cultured meat. And likewise, other sources of suffering in the world, from wild animal suffering to recalibrating the hedonic treadmill pain sensitivity, eventually they are going to, I think they are going to be phased out, the biology of suffering. But it is going to be a horrendously long drawn out process. And yeah, human benevolence is extraordinarily frail.
So I had an experience yesterday that was very interesting. This is from the Zoom company, and Zoom is more important in our lives all the time. And they invited me to this 4-hour webinar. And I was a bit concerned about that. It was about all their products and all their aspirations for the future and so on. And you can see what all these things are. And this is indeed all of them. There aren't other subjects that they talked about. These are the main subjects that they talked about. And what you will notice is that virtual backgrounds, or virtual backgrounds as a mode of presentation, like an alternative to PowerPoint, is not a part of this graphic. And I was there for the 4 hours and I heard what they pitched. And my concern had been that, having come up with this idea that we could now give presentations using virtual backgrounds, that they had made my idea a product and were going to promote it, but they didn't do that. On the other hand, they facilitated it very much. When I first suggested this idea on March 1st, 2021, it really didn't work very well because Mac and PC are so different. And on the one platform, you can do all sorts of things that you can't do on the other, and so on. But gradually over the next few months, they made everything the same. So now the number of virtual backgrounds you can have on Mac and PC is 16, and the tricks you can play are the same. So they have kind of accommodated what I suggested without incorporating me into their plan or stealing any of my ideas. And they treated me very well. And I thought that sort of, I mean, it's a small part of our future. But if you thought that Zoom was run by really mean, evil people, that would make our world even worse. So I didn't get that impression. I met the CEO and the other high-level leaders, and yeah, they all seem like kind of empathetic people. Yeah, I will now take this down so you don't think I'm just completely overwhelmed with thoughts about Zoom, which is not true. Yeah. So we'll go back to this, which is about machine consciousness. There we go. We're back to that. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left in the teaching session. So does anybody have any burning questions or various things you'd like to raise or proposals? Yeah.
Consensus. I like consensus. This is, I hope people agree.
Yeah. So I want to point out that it's not David Pearce and me doing this review of David Wood's book. It's just me, so that I won't necessarily take everything David Pearce has said today and incorporate it in there. But I think his ideas have been very useful in sort of balancing out my thinking about Stuart Russell's lectures, and I now have a much more complete understanding. And yeah, I'll probably share the final version of the review. The review gets reviewed. Isn't that the way life should be? So I am going to submit it in the next 3 days, but then my review is reviewed by 1 or 2 other people that will come to some sort of agreement. We'll see if they are shocked by how many pictures there are, like Ashita was, and thinks that maybe we don't need quite so many pictures, or yeah, we'll see what they think. But this has been in many ways a most unusual teaching session, but many of our teaching sessions are most unusual, I guess. So like the Nepal oriented ones on Tuesday were also highly unusual. But isn't that the way the doing of good work in the world comes from that, I think. So anyway, okay, any other thoughts? Or as David Pearce says, it seems like we have a kind of tacit consensus, eh? Nobody seems to have a very, very different opinion from everybody else or anything like that. Yeah, so that's good. Okay, well, I might even let you out 3 minutes early. And yeah, that would be fine. And so thank you very much. And we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye then. Thank you, David.
Thank you to all your students. See you online, I hope. Take care.
Yeah,
Good night.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Good night.